Yeah, now it's the right guy, right? Hello and welcome back to Build Propulsion Lab at DevNexus 2024. Got another slot, yet another speaker here at DevNexus.
What's up?
Sean McQuaid is here with me to talk about developer productivity engineering, but in the front space.
Yep.
And this is very exciting because all I know about developer productivity engineering in front-end is that everything is terrible, everybody are in pain, there are new framework every day, and it's worse than the previous one.
Oh man, I don't know how much I agree with that, but
okay, so
yeah,
tell me that is not the case,
yeah,
or not the case anymore, at least.
I think I could see the argument from back in the day when JavaScript was only the language that was in play, but since TypeScript's come into the game and we have a type system now, like editors have auto-completion and on hover for types coming through, like there are so many mechanisms in place to make developers more productive in development and prevent mistakes that could happen in development that can impact production than ever, in my opinion. TypeScript alone accomplishes that.
So TypeScript is the game changer when it comes to developer productivity in front-end.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, that's like a huge part of like the local development experience is using TypeScript really effectively. And obviously another piece of DPE to me is like CI/CD pipelining and all of that. I think there are a lot of competitors in the front-end space, rightfully so, for developer platforms that basically can deploy products really easily. Traditionally, it's been a little challenging for teams to know the best way to deploy an artifact, and I think companies like Vercel, like Netlify, like they're all entering the space rightfully so, and they're trying to eliminate the amount of time it takes to get something in production. Even at Chick-fil-A, so I work at Chick-fil-A as an engineer, one of our teams is using Vercel now and has noticed a huge drop down in time spent getting to production because the builds are just so much faster.
What is this? How does it help? What's
helpful about it?
Yep.
Vercel, I mean, to my knowledge, these platforms usually have like pretty aggressive caching on dependencies, previous build artifacts, all that sort of thing. So the nice thing about them is, I mean, let's be honest, like all these platforms are usually built on another cloud provider and it's just a wrapper of it, right? But the benefits you get out of using a platform like that for just productivity alone is you're taking your engineers away from the need to worry about CI/CD, like CD pipelining explicitly, and they can just focus on developing features that provide business value ultimately.
Okay, all right. So it's basically a CI/CD platform.
Yeah.
That is it tailored for front end?
Correct. Yeah. Vercel is
right.
Yeah.
So I guess there is an interesting trade-off then. If using, I guess it's the usual trade-off of best of in class versus best of breed. And I mean, should we have a separate CI/CD platform or tool just for front-end development, or should we have a platform that builds them all, including back-end and what's not?
I think keeping them separate is valid. I think front-end and back-end have some intersection of concerns, but usually like when you're dealing with like a single page application and like traditional like Angular, Vue, React, you're looking at a client-side rendered app that is heavily relying on a lot of static assets, and that usually lends itself to like being an Amazon Web Services with like an S3 bucket and CloudFront distributions. Usually backend engineers don't have to think about that as much. Like they just have like a Kubernetes cluster that they're deployed to, and they have some infrastructure as code, usually deploying like some tables or databases and such, but it's just different infrastructure in place, in my opinion. I think it puts it in different classes.
That being said, but it also, I mean, there are cross-cutting concerns,
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
So security, for example, governance, and even test coverage, this kind of stuff. That
Correct.
If you have a different CI/CD pipeline,
correct, you have to then build to the new CI/CD pipeline.
Right, and you just need to redo all this stuff.
There's also the option of extending the current platform to support front end, but use the same pipelining. Just have different infrastructure as code that you would use effectively to manage that.
So you can use those tools that are catering for front end out of existing, under the hood of existing platforms?
You could. I mean, like at least in terms of AWS land, like I think a big journey for my career has been seeing the value in having your infrastructure written down, because I've been on teams where that has not been the case, and I've had to like ask people, hey, tell me all the S3 buckets we have and all the lambdas we have for this part, which is really painful. But yeah, I mean, ideal state isn't always the case for most businesses, right? I think part of the reason I'm really partial to using a platform for front-end deployment is it obfuscates that complexity. And I've found, at least in the front-end space, a lot of engineers are very hesitant to get involved in the DevOps element of their pipelining.
Of course.
Which is understandable because it's a totally different brain that you're using effectively.
That's a completely different skill, for sure, for sure.
So I'm a big fan of keeping developers productive on the things that they can provide value at, and I find front-end engineering usually, the engineers in that space are really passionate about making visually appealing, accessible websites.
Exactly. And not necessarily passionate about infrastructure and CI/CD.
Exactly. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this tool, this CI/CD tool, it's basically obviously cloud native. You can deploy it. How it eventually comes together with the backend part, where the coordination is.
Yeah, so usually, at least from when I've worked on teams before, you use the front end tooling like Vercel, Fly, Netlify, that sort of thing, just to deploy your front end artifact, and then you have API calls either happening from the browser, so directly from the browser to a separate service layer, which you can deploy on whatever platform you want at that point, Kubernetes, whatever thing you're bought into, go for it. I don't really care. As long as it gives me the JSON I want back, cool. But one option you have when you use like a server-side rendering framework on like a platform like Vercel is you can create what's essentially an API coordination layer where you're obfuscating like headers. For example, like it's probably good to have a same site HTTP only cookie that you grab from the browser and then and it's encrypted. You decrypt it from the browser at that server layer, and then you make your calls and that API orchestration layer. So you're basically eliminating the possibility of like a token leaking its way to like Google Chrome DevTools, which is a very like common thing. A lot of websites do that. They use pure client-side requests, and then it just has security holes that come out of that, and you don't even think about it. Most front-end engineers don't think about that consequence.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have to say, it never occurred to me that it actually makes sense to have like a completely separate deployment, because front-end and back-end are usually that loosely coupled that it's not a concern, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Decoupling is like, it's just the easiest way to go forward, because I've actually been on teams where the front end and the back end were in the same repo,
right?
And all of a sudden your pipelining gets way more complex, because now you're worrying about two separate sets of infrastructure as code in the same repo. The cognitive complexity is really high. They have, like, for one team I was on, it's a Java backend and then like a JavaScript front end, which is like two totally different ecosystems to work in. I could see argument if you were like in a Node backend with like a JavaScript front end or whatever. There's a little more intersection there, but you're talking about two totally different dependency management systems. It's very complicated to get that right.
That's today I learned. Yeah. Sean, thank you very much for coming.
Oh man, thank you for having me.
And we'll see you all soon enough in our next episode. For now, bye.